Have you ever wondered why so many seemingly harmless 80s cartoons suddenly vanished from TV screens without explanation? The bright colors and heroic themes often hid stories that went far beyond what networks wanted children to see. From psychological terror to shockingly realistic violence, these animated shows crossed lines that governments, parents, and broadcasters were not ready to accept. Today, we dive into the forgotten world of banned and controversial cartoons. Number 10. The Real Ghostbusters, 1986. At first glance, The Real Ghostbusters looked like a harmless supernatural comedy based on a blockbuster hit. Kids loved its humor, its wild ghosts, and its upbeat energy. But behind the laughter, the series occasionally drifted into genuinely unsettling nightmare territory that shocked parents' groups around the world. One episode in particular, The Boogeyman Cometh, created a media storm that forced networks to rethink how far a children's cartoon could go. The story followed a creature who fed on children's fear. Unlike the friendly ghosts elsewhere in the show, this boogeyman had a monstrous, elongated face, glowing eyes, and twisted expressions that were far more nightmarish than anything typically shown in kids' television. Complaints began pouring in immediately. Parents in the United States, United Kingdom, and Canada accused the episode of causing anxiety episodes and sleep problems among young viewers. Some children reportedly refused to sleep alone after watching it. Broadcasters panicked. Several stations pulled the episode from rotation after only a few airings, while others edited out frames of the boogeyman's most disturbing shots. Critics argued that the character design leaned too close to pure horror rather than kid-friendly spookiness. Others defended the episode, saying it dared to explore childhood fear in a meaningful way. The controversy left a lasting mark on the show's direction. Future storylines toned down the darker elements, and producers avoided psychological horror themes that could trigger similar backlash. Today, the episode is remembered as one of the boldest and most provocative things ever attempted in a Saturday morning cartoon. It remains a cult favorite, yet also a symbol of how quickly public outrage could reshape a beloved 80s series. Number 9. M.A.S.K. 1985. M.A.S.K. was marketed as the perfect blend of action toys and heroic adventure. Kids adored the transforming vehicles and masked heroes, while advertisers celebrated its merchandising potential. But beneath the glossy animation, the show carried a level of realistic military violence that many international broadcasters ultimately refused to air. It was a surprising twist for a program designed purely to entertain children during after-school hours. Unlike other action cartoons of the era, M.A.S.K. often portrayed tactical gunplay explosions and paramilitary combat with an intensity that alarmed parents' groups. Laser weapons were not the norm here. Characters used bullets, grenades, and realistic assault gear, which felt too close to real-world conflicts still unfolding in the 80s. The Cold War was at its height, and some countries, including parts of Europe, viewed the show as an inappropriate glorification of modern warfare. Broadcasters in Sweden, Norway, and parts of the United Kingdom either banned certain episodes or aired them only in heavily edited versions. Scenes showing direct hits on vehicles, explosions near civilians, or too much realistic weaponry were cut out. In one notable case, a network removed nearly 4 minutes from a single episode to meet its children's programming standards. Behind the scenes, writers argued that the show's intensity was part of its identity. They wanted to tell more grounded stories rather than rely on sci-fi lasers that dominated rival cartoons. But pressure from international markets forced the studio to reconsider. Later episodes softened the violence, shifting toward more fantasy-oriented plots and non-lethal weapons. Even with these changes, M.A.S.K's reputation as a borderline militaristic cartoon stuck with it. Some fans admired the seriousness, while others found it unnerving. Today, the series is remembered as one of the most controversial toy-based cartoons of the decade, a show that pushed the boundaries of children's entertainment and paid the price for going too far for its time. Number 8. BraveStarr, 1987. BraveStarr broke new ground with its mix of science fiction, Western themes, and moral lessons. At a glance, it seemed like a typical educational adventure program teaching responsibility, courage, and respect. But one episode titled The Price shocked the industry and set a precedent for how far animated shows could go before crossing a line. It became one of the most infamous banned cartoons of the 80s. The episode portrayed a young boy named Brad who becomes addicted to a dangerous outlaw substance. As the story unfolds, Brad's behavior grows erratic, desperate, and self-destructive. Instead of offering an easy resolution, the writers took a shocking approach. The boy collapses and dies on screen, leaving BraveStarr and the other heroes devastated. There was no magical cure, no reversal. It was a raw, emotional depiction of consequences that no other children's show of the era had ever dared to show. Networks panicked. Many refused to air the episode at all, while others broadcast it only once before pulling it permanently. Stations in the United Kingdom, Australia, and parts of the United States labeled it too intense for young audiences. Advocacy groups argued that showing a child's death in a cartoon was unnecessarily traumatic, even if the message was educational. Behind the scenes, Filmation defended the episode. They insisted the story was meant as a powerful warning to young viewers and believed it could save lives. But the backlash forced the studio to limit similar themes. Although BraveStarr continued exploring moral lessons, it never again attempted a storyline as dark or as uncompromising as The Price. Today, the episode is remembered as a bold yet controversial moment in animation history. It proved that 80s cartoons could tackle real-world issues, but it also demonstrated the limits of what parents and broadcasters were willing to accept. The Price remains banned or seldom aired, even in modern reruns. Number 7. Bionic 6, 1987. Bionic 6 began as a colorful, family-oriented superhero adventure about a group of heroes enhanced with bionic powers. It was energetic, positive, and visually impressive, boasting some of the best animation quality of the decade. But beneath the friendly surface, the show contained surprisingly intense violence that caused several international broadcasters to push back, leading to bans edits and restricted airings. The combat scenes often showed characters being slammed through walls, crushed by machinery, or hit with powerful weapon blasts. Unlike many cartoons where injuries were glossed over, Bionic 6 sometimes portrayed visible physical strain, bruising, and exhaustion. European networks, particularly in France, Germany, and Scandinavia, reacted strongly to what they saw as excessive brutality for children's content. Some countries banned the show outright, while others demanded significant edits. Battle sequences were shortened, impacts removed, and intense confrontations softened. Certain episodes involving captured civilians or psychological intimidation faced total removal from broadcast lineups. Behind the scenes, writers were frustrated. They believed the action emphasized family unity, courage, and responsibility. But international standards for children's programming were shifting, and networks feared legal complaints. To preserve distribution, the studio toned down later episodes, making fights less physical and focusing more on teamwork and adventure. Even so, the show never shook off its controversial reputation. Bionic 6 developed a small but passionate cult following, and fans often praise it today for daring to be more intense than its competitors. But its struggles also reveal how tightly 80s cartoons were controlled by censors who believed even slightly realistic violence could harm young audiences. Number 6. Inhumanoids, 1986. Inhumanoids looked like a typical toy tie in cartoon on the surface. It had heroic scientists, monstrous villains, and a futuristic world full of battles and inventions. But the moment the show aired, parents realized it was something far darker than anything else on Saturday morning television. With grotesque creature designs, body horror sequences, and disturbingly intense violence, Inhumanoids quickly became one of the most banned and restricted cartoons of the 80s. The villains were not just scary, they were nightmare fuel. Tendril, a regenerating plant monster, could tear himself apart and grow back in seconds. Decompose. A decayed skeletal beast had the power to transform humans into rotting zombie-like creatures. Network executives were horrified. This was supposed to air next to cheerful shows like My Little Pony and The Smurfs. Instead, children were seeing imagery closer to a horror film than a toy commercial. Several countries, including the United Kingdom and parts of Asia, refused to air the series at all. American stations that did broadcast it often pushed it to early morning slots where fewer children would watch. Some episodes were cut so heavily that scenes no longer made sense. Certain storylines where humans were mutated or partially absorbed by monsters were removed entirely. The production team defended the show, insisting it encouraged bravery, teamwork, and environmental awareness. But behind the scenes, even some animators admitted they were shocked by how intense certain sequences appeared once fully animated. Complaints continued to mount. Parents reported nightmares among young viewers, and broadcasters feared being accused of psychological harm. Inhumanoids ended quickly, leaving only a small cult legacy behind. Yet its impact still echoes. It proved that pushing horror themes too far could doom even the most ambitious cartoon. Today, collectors seek out uncut versions that reveal the full boldness and brutality of a series that went further than any 80s cartoon had gone before. Number 5. RoboCop, the Animated Series, 1988. RoboCop, the animated series, arrived with enormous expectations. It was based on a massively popular sci-fi franchise, but there was one major issue. The original film was infamous for its graphic violence and its intense critique of law enforcement and corporate power. Turning that into a children's cartoon was already a risky idea. The result was a show filled with toned-down violence on paper, yet still shockingly intense for global broadcasters. The storyline followed the cybernetic hero as he battled criminals in a dystopian future. Even when the violence was softened, the show still depicted explosions, realistic gunfire, and threats that mirrored the dark tone of the films. Many countries argued that the concept of a brutally injured police officer turned into a machine was too disturbing for children, regardless of how sanitized the plot became. Networks in Canada, Australia, and parts of Europe banned several episodes outright. Some territories refused to air the show at all, citing psychological harm and inappropriate themes. Scenes showing lethal weapons, cybernetic injury, or criminals being shot were among the most commonly removed. Behind the scenes, writers struggled with censorship notes that piled up for every episode. Broadcasters demanded the removal of certain fights, depiction of wounds, and darker character moments. Despite all these edits, critics still claimed the show was too violent, too bleak, and too frightening for its intended audience. Ultimately, RoboCop the animated series survived for only a single season. Toy companies struggled to market it, parents avoided it, and networks continued pulling it from schedules. Today, it stands as a fascinating example of an 80s trend when studios repeatedly tried to convert R-rated hits into kid-friendly cartoons and often discovered the limits of censorship the hard way. Number 4. Spiral Zone, 1987. Spiral Zone was unlike anything else produced for children in the 80s. Its world was bleak, militaristic, and filled with psychological tension. Instead of fantasy heroes or colorful mascots, the series followed elite soldiers fighting to free humanity from a bioengineered plague that transformed civilians into mindless slaves. The show's grim realism and dystopian tone triggered widespread bans, making it one of the darkest cartoons ever aimed at kids. The villain known as Overlord unleashed a weapon that bathed entire regions in a red glowing fog called the Zone. Anyone who entered became infected, losing their will and becoming gray-skinned zombies under his control. Many countries viewed this premise as far too frightening for younger viewers. The imagery of infected civilians wandering silently through ruined cities struck networks as disturbingly close to real-world fears about viral outbreaks and biowarfare. Broadcasters in Germany, France, and parts of Asia banned the show or restricted it to late evening slots. Concerns ranged from psychological harm to fears it would worsen anxiety in children living through real geopolitical tension. The Cold War was still raging. Concepts like airborne contamination and global panic were not abstract for audiences in the 80s. The censorship pressure forced animators to soften certain scenes. Some episodes saw reduced intensity and transformation sequences, while others had entire segments cut. Yet even with changes, the show retained a brooding, unsettling atmosphere that continued to provoke complaints. Spiral Zone ended after a single season, but its legacy grew. Fans admired its unusually mature storytelling and sophisticated world-building. Yet its troubled broadcast history serves as a clear reminder that children's programming of the era had strict boundaries, and Spiral Zone crossed nearly all of them. Number 3. Toxic Crusaders, 1989. At first glance, Toxic Crusaders looked like a colorful eco-themed cartoon about mutated heroes protecting the environment. But beneath its cheerful surface lay a surprising connection. It was based on The Toxic Avenger, a notorious R-rated cult film known for over-the-top violence and disturbing content. This link alone raised eyebrows among parents groups and broadcasters who questioned whether a children's show based on such a franchise should exist at all. Although the cartoon toned everything down significantly, traces of its outrageous origins still appeared. The show featured grotesque, mutant slapstick violence and villains who dumped radioactive waste on towns. While presented in a comedic style, the imagery often mirrored the wild extremes of the original film. Several networks accused the cartoon of promoting anti-corporation messages too aggressively at a time when environmental activism was a sensitive political topic. Some regions in Europe and Asia pulled the show entirely. Others allowed it only in edited form, removing scenes where characters melted objects, leaked toxic goo, or engaged in destructive behavior that younger children might imitate. Toy lines tied to the series faced backlash from parents who argued that the characters looked frightening rather than heroic. Behind the scenes, the creators insisted the show delivered positive messages about pollution and responsibility. They believed the over-the-top humor made serious issues approachable. But the controversy overshadowed these intentions. Complaints poured in. Critics claimed it was inappropriate to turn an ultra-violent adult property into a cartoon for children, even with revisions. Toxic Crusaders lasted only one season, leaving behind a strange legacy. Fans appreciate its campy energy and environmental lessons. Yet the show remains a rare example of a cartoon banned not for what it showed, but for the shocking origins of its source material. Number 2. ThunderCats, 1985. ThunderCats was one of the biggest animated hits of the 80s, filled with adventure mythic world-building and unforgettable characters. Kids loved its blend of sci-fi and fantasy, and its heroic themes made it a staple of global television. But beneath its heroic structure lay a surprising level of intensity. One particular episode, titled The Demolisher, sparked controversy across multiple regions and led to bans, edits, and restricted broadcasts. The storyline featured a mysterious armored warrior who defeated the ThunderCats one by one, using brutal hand-to-hand combat and advanced weaponry. While most 80s cartoons softened impacts or used comedic reactions, the Demolisher's battles were shockingly gritty. Characters were slammed into the ground, sliced at with blades, and knocked unconscious in scenes that felt closer to live-action martial arts films than Saturday morning animation. Parents reacted strongly. Some complained that the violence seemed too realistic, while others claimed the episode encouraged children to imitate dangerous behavior. A few viewers even argued that the Demolisher's stoic, menacing presence was too frightening for young audiences. As complaints escalated, broadcasters in parts of the United Kingdom, Italy, and Australia pulled the episode from rotation. Others aired it only in edited formats, removing several intense moments, including close-range attacks and prolonged fight sequences. Behind the scenes, the production team defended the artistic direction. They believed the episode examined humility and discipline by showing the heroes confronting a superior opponent. But network executives worried about lawsuits, parental backlash, and a growing shift towards stricter content regulations. ThunderCats continued to air globally, but The Demolisher became one of its rare hidden chapters, seldom rerun and occasionally omitted from broadcast packages. Today, the episode remains a cult fascination among fans. Many admire its bold choreography and darker tone, while others agree with the censors who believed it pushed the boundaries too far for a youth audience. Either way, it stands as a reminder that even the most beloved cartoons could trigger bans when they stepped into unfamiliar or controversial territory. Number 1. The Adventures of the Galaxy Rangers, 1986. The Adventures of the Galaxy Rangers was ahead of its time. Mixing space opera with mature storytelling, the show embraced deeper themes than most 80s cartoons dared to attempt. Characters faced real dangers, suffered emotional consequences, and fought enemies who were not always defeated through simple solutions. This complexity made the series beloved by older viewers, but also placed it directly in the crosshairs of international censors. Unlike most toy-based cartoons, Galaxy Rangers featured lethal weapons that fired bullets rather than lasers. Characters experienced injury fatigue and vulnerability. Some episodes depicted the death of supporting characters or civilians caught in crossfire. These elements triggered immediate concern among broadcasters who believed such realism was inappropriate for the afternoon cartoon block. In the United Kingdom, Germany, and several Asian markets, multiple episodes were banned outright. Scenes involving gunfights, explosions, or dying characters were considered too traumatic for children. In some cases, entire storylines were pulled because networks refused to air content featuring permanent consequences, such as characters being imprisoned or losing loved ones. Censorship departments demanded edits to soften impacts, remove reaction shots, or cut out emotional breakdowns that followed tragic events. Behind the scenes, writers were frustrated. They had crafted a universe with depth emotional stakes and narrative continuity that set the show apart from its contemporaries. But these same elements made it a target for censors seeking to protect young audiences from depictions that felt too close to real-world danger. The production team attempted minor compromises, but the overall tone remained a challenge for international markets. Ultimately, Galaxy Rangers survived only 2 seasons, yet developed a powerful cult following. Fans admire its bravery for tackling mature themes in an era when most cartoons avoided complexity. The bans imposed on it only strengthened its mystique, creating a legacy built on ambition, controversy, and a willingness to tell stories that mattered. It remains one of the boldest and most misunderstood animated series of the 80s. These forgotten 80s. Cartoons remind us how animation often pushed boundaries far beyond what audiences expected. Each ban reveals a moment when imagination clashed with fear. If you want more hidden stories, lost episodes, and controversial classics, stay with this channel and explore the strange history of animation with us.